Chapter 15. The Black Pillar. Unable to sleep, Corrin seeks to clear his head. A chance meeting with Azura leads to an unexpected revelation.
Azura.
Destined to seek life beyond the shore, just out of reach. Yet the waters ever change, flowing like time. The path is yours to climb.
I really love the reveal of the sideways landscape.
Tell me, why are you here?
Azura?
Huh? How troubling.
No.
This is a callback to Chapter 5 that doesn't exist in the original script.
What was that?
Corrin is also made a lot more assertive here.
Phew. Huh? Of course. No. Oh.
This is a very happy reunion indeed, and it also happens to be one of the easiest chapters in all of Conquest. You see, the developers clearly wanted to achieve something unusual for a Fire Emblem game. They wanted to make the second half of Conquest hard, but they wanted to make sure that the main character would be prepared for that. So they created a map whose entire purpose, at least in gameplay terms, is to make sure that Corrin is trained up and promoted. We are going to do that, exactly as intended, but Corrin is not the only person who needs training. We've neglected Azura for a long time, so she's still at level 8. Eventually, Azura must get to level 25. She's not exempt from the rules of this challenge. And for that matter, neither is Gunter, who is required to reach at least level 20. Gunter has come back to us much stronger than before. His stats are greatly improved. He's also packing some respectable weapon ranks, which allow him to use many kinds of effective weapons, most notably the hammer and the beast killer. Because of these upgrades, Gunter is a fairly effective combat unit in his own right, albeit one with very bad base speed and horrific growths across the board. Still, Gunter's personal skill remains his best feature. After this chapter, Conquest starts to favor enemy phase juggernauting more than ever before. There are several factors that contribute to that, and we'll get into those factors later, but for now, suffice it to say that Corrin works best in the second half of Conquest with strong, accurate 1-2 range weapons that can double. Those don't really exist. The accurate ones aren't strong, and the strong ones aren't accurate. But Gunter's forceful partner skill fixes that, making Corrin much more effective. All that stands between us and victory in this mission is a dozen enemies at level 15 or so. None of them are very dangerous, they have unimpressive stats and only a few skills. But if you just run straight to the escape tiles on the eastern edge of the map, you miss out on several stat boosters carried by enemies on the second landmass to the south. You can't fly there. Instead, you get to that southern island by using the Dragon Vein. When you activate it, the Dragon Vein on this map creates replicas of all 3 of your units, and it spawns them inside this structure. While the originals fight their way eastward, the copies of Corrin, Azura, and Gunter can simultaneously head west to grab the extra items and confront the boss. This is totally optional, but it's well worth it, and it gives you a chance to play with a fun mechanic that's usually reserved for high-level mechanists. You can acquire a goddess icon from a ninja, a spirit dust from a lancer, and a speed wing from the generic hero boss. There are also a handful of vulneraries available. You'll probably need those, since Corrin and Azura are unlikely to be in staff classes, and Gunter can't be. The only other sources of healing are Azura's personal skill, which is slow, and a set of heal tiles on the east end of the southern island, a location that is pretty inconvenient. Under a 20-turn time limit, it's hard to abuse those. We're not optimizing for turn count, but we should be able to get this done in way less than 20 turns. There's really not much pressure, so let's just chill out to the soothing tones of Pass Below.
I believe in you.
Replicas share most features with their originals. Their inventories, stats, classes, skills, levels, and experience are all synchronized. That goes for HP too. Both versions take damage simultaneously, and when one dies, so does their counterpart. The only stat modifiers that aren't shared are pair-up bonuses, since the original and the replica might have different pair-up partners. One important distinction is that replicas are not actually the characters that they are copies of. They are lifeless automata, so they don't earn support points, and they don't have any support ranks. Corrin's replica is not the main character, so Forceful Partner and similar skills do not work on him. He does have the supportive skill, but it does nothing because that skill requires at least a C support, which the replica can never have. Also, skills that trigger at the beginning or end of a unit's turn, such as Azura's Healing Descant skill or Keaton's Collector skill, will only work for the originals. Furthermore, Azura's replica cannot sing. Because she also can't passively heal people, she has basically no utility outside of combat. That's pretty annoying, but it does mean there's no real opportunity cost if Azura's replica uses the attack command. By the way, for the rest of this mission, if I have to distinguish the replicas from the originals, I will refer to the replicas as Corrin Prime, Azura Prime, and Gunter Prime.
We need each other.
This one's not afraid to
The
die.
replicas can't move far enough to get in range of the enemies, at least not in the way that I want them to, so Gunter Prime and Azura Prime just move closer and wait. But Corrin Prime can hang out on the heal tiles for one turn to get some extra healing after Corrin himself takes a hit on enemy phase.
We will not fail.
The first combat encounter we're setting up has Corrin using Azura's Dual Strike. Azura can get experience just from singing, but it's important for her to participate in combat too so that she can improve her lance rank.
Let's go.
That's not something that usually matters on a normal playthrough, but eventually we'll need to put Azura in positions where she must counterattack against tomes and other ranged weapons, so she has to earn at least a D rank for javelin access. It's best to do that now, when she's one of only 3 units on the field. Her competition for combat time is Gunter, who doesn't really need more weapon ranks and doesn't have a lot to gain by leveling up.
Ready for
Most of the battles we do on this mission will be unpaired. That's our usual style because it maximizes our experience points and our weapon rank progression.
It's over.
It's still pretty easy to do that here because enemy quality is rather low. But this chapter represents a turning point. Soon, the enemies will promote and become substantially
I'll
stronger.
protect you.
They will have much higher offensive stats, they'll get better weapons, including a lot of ranged weapons like spears and tomahawks, and they'll have greater mobility.
This should help.
As a consequence of those upgrades, fighting in tag teams tends to become much dicier for all but your toughest units. When enemies have greater attack range, it's harder to make them attack any particular unit using positioning alone. If you can't prevent the enemies from reaching your dual strikers, then both units in your duo will need to have about equal damage output and survivability. Otherwise, they will miss their kill thresholds or even get killed themselves. And think about how the stats work. Enemy attack power scales a lot faster than your defense or resistance, which are the main deciders of your ability to take on multiple enemies while unpaired. HP also helps, but each hit point only counts once during a given enemy phase, while defense or resistance are applied against every attack that we face.
We will not fail.
Conversely, the enemies aren't really trying to survive multiple rounds of combat. For them, HP and defense or resistance count toward their overall bulk much more equally. In effect, enemy survivability grows with 2 stats independently. On the other hand, if you're trying to kill those enemies using a tag team, then usually you aren't trying to double them.
I believe.
Instead, you're going for one big hit from the lead, followed by the killing blow from the support unit. In that case, you do get full credit for each point of strength or magic on the lead unit, but on the dual striker, each point only counts for half. So your offensive scaling with dual strikes is less efficient than the enemy's defensive scaling. There are lots of ways to rectify that in Fates, but that phenomenon is a significant reason why tag teams don't work quite as neatly in the late game as they do in the early game. But now consider what happens when you pair up. As long as you're doubling, you only have to deal 50% damage, which is a much more generous threshold, especially given that your pair-up partner can directly improve your offensive stats. That makes pairing up a lot more efficient, as long as your lead unit can meet 3 key requirements. They need a 1-2 range weapon that can make follow-up
I'll
attacks,
protect you.
they need enough speed to actually follow up, and they need to consistently kill the enemies in 2 hits or less. You also have to worry about survivability, but your lead will be completely immune to enemy dual strikes, and if they're doubling all the enemies, then every other incoming attack should get blocked by dual guards. With those benefits in play, it's a lot easier to survive 4 or 5 or 6 enemies at a time. So a strong unit with an appropriate pair-up partner can move and fight basically wherever they want, which in turn means that you can make better use of the additional mobility that your units get when they promote. One of the main downsides of pairing up is that it gives you less accuracy, and that's a concern because lots of enemies in Conquest will punish you if you miss and fail to kill them. The kinds of weapons you want to use, the ones that can double and have 1-2 range, tend to be either weak or inaccurate, or sometimes both. You can and should rectify those deficiencies with forging or skills, but it's expensive to do so. There's really no such thing as a low investment unit in the latter stages of Conquest. It's also worth pointing out that most units do not have access to the kinds of weapons that allow for enemy phase juggernauting while paired up. Hand axes and javelins and the kodachi cannot double, and in most cases they cannot kill the enemies in a single hit. So in general, a top tier combat unit is one who has the right stats and classes to wield daggers, tones, or magic weapons like the Levin Sword.
Oh,
At level 10, Azura learns Inspiring Song, a skill that makes her apply a 3-point buff to skill, speed, and luck whenever she sings. This is one of the tools that makes it possible for a lot more units to do paired up combat efficiently. Doubling thresholds are crucial for that, and there are lots of enemies in the upcoming chapters that have really high speed. But when you combine Inspiring Song with other bonuses, you can easily give 10 or 11 extra speed to 1 or 2 of your main combat units every turn. and the 6 extra points of hit that Azura provides are pretty valuable too. Another new resource that makes pairing up more effective is Gunter, who makes a fantastic partner for Corrin. He gives Corrin extra movement, a bunch of defense, a significant damage boost, and most importantly, a huge hit bonus. Or you can take a different approach. What Gunter can do for Corrin, Corrin can do for everyone else. And some characters can develop into top-tier combat units even faster than Corrin can, particularly if their initial classes provide better skills than Nor Prince does. All that said, we will continue using attack stance as much as we can. After all, our goals are to maximize experience and support gains, not to kill all the enemies as fast as possible. One of the neat tricks you can do with replicas is to exploit the fact that they share inventories with their originals. Corrin Prime wants his Dragonstone for the upcoming enemy phase. We can make him equip it at a distance by trading with the original Corrin. With the Dragonstone, Corrin Prime can't counterattack this ninja, but that's a small price to pay to guarantee survival against the Lancer afterward. Having grabbed a hand axe from the convoy, Gunter can counterattack this ninja. You might have already noticed that these enemies don't obey the usual rules in Conquest, where they normally refuse to attack if they can't damage you, and you can hit them back. I imagine the developers made an exception here because this map could be really tedious if your Corrin were really bulky and none of the enemies were willing to attack you.
Listen to your elders. Watch out!
I can always count on you.
We do have to train Gunter, so we don't mind giving him a couple of kills, but he's not a huge priority at the moment. We'd rather work on leveling up Corrin and promoting him. When he promotes, Corrin gains access to tomes, and we want to raise his tome rank as quickly as possible. So instead of having Gunter finish off the opponents he weakened on enemy phase, we're saving those kills for Corrin. In the meantime, we can beat up this ninja, eventually using Azura's dual strike to finish him off.
Be careful.
We've got this.
Trust me. It's my turn.
How'd you do that?
Gunter has a really low internal level, almost like Felicia and Jakob. He only counts as being 5 levels higher than displayed, making him effectively level 15, and his level cap is 30.
Here I am. We're not done yet.
One of the rules of our challenge is that every character must unlock access to a new class by friendship if they can. Gunter can only support 2 people. One of those is Corrin, and nobody can get an A+ support with him. But Gunter also supports Jakob, who gives him the Troubadour class tree. According to the rules, we have to keep deploying Gunter long enough for him to achieve an A+ with Jakob. That won't take as long as you might think. Their support is a fast one, and because we used female Corrin before the Branch of Fate, we had both Jakob and Gunter during chapters 2 and 3. The support points they earned with each other on those maps still count, so when Jakob comes back, he and Gunter will already have a C support. They will only have to be deployed together 3 more times to complete their support chain. I don't expect to take full advantage of that, however. As long as Gunter's being deployed, I'd really like him to work with Corrin, and that will make it difficult to get the B support between Gunter and Jakob in just one map. We could go out of our way to do that anyway, but we can afford to deploy Gunter 1 extra time. As a bonus, that will make it really easy for Gunter to achieve his level requirement.
Here we go.
He won't even really have to try.
Look me in the eyes.
Once Gunter has reached level 20 and unlocked his A+ support with Jakob, he's going to retire, so it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to give him any of our limited resources. But in most runs, changing his class can be a pretty good idea.
No need.
Gunter can readily take on a team support role. Wyvern Lord makes him a flying shelter user who learns rally defense very quickly, or he can go for rally skill as a bow knight. And if you want to go all in on Corrin, then you can optimize Gunter's pair bonuses by making him a Wyvern Lord, Malignite, or Bow Knight, depending on whether Corrin wants strength in flight, or magic in flight, or speed. Even the Troubadour class Gunter gets from Jakob has some merit for this, because Butler provides both magic and speed at the same time.
Allow me to join you.
We've been sitting on our heart seals for quite a while now. We still have the one from Chapter 9, and there are 2 more waiting in the level 2 staff shop. If we're not willing to give one to Gunter, then what are we saving them for? Well, for one, I do think that the team support role I just proposed for Gunter is really useful, but we're going to reserve that role for Jakob. He too can change classes to get an early rally ability, but Jakob also offers staff and aura support, and he's going to stick around longer, and he can pass down his stats and skills to his kids. Another heart seal will go to Odin. In a campaign where we will eventually replace the entire first generation with their kids, we definitely want to invest a little more in Odin so that he can pass Vantage down to his daughter. I promise, that investment will be completely justified. The third heart seal is one I haven't been very sure of. I've done this challenge twice before, and in both of those runs, I used that heart seal to create a second ninja. We're certainly going to do that eventually, but while planning this campaign, I took a hard look at that idea and wondered whether it could wait until after Chapter 20, when we can buy heart seals in unlimited quantities. I concluded that yes, it can wait, and therefore we can give that heart seal to someone else. I think the best person to pick is Corrin. By becoming a dark mage, Corrin can learn 2 very useful skills in just 2 levels. But what's the best time to do that? In most runs, it's not very important to stay in Nor Prince, and if you haven't already changed Corrin's class, the best practice is probably to go ahead and do so here in Chapter 15. The next skill Corrin will learn after promotion is Draconic Hex, which debuffs Corrin's opponents by 4 points in every stat after battle. That sounds impressive, but it's not usually all that helpful in practice. Corrin is normally trying to kill the enemies, not weaken them. Not so for us, however. We will have plenty of uses for a free and feeble effect. We're also not quite done with the Dragonstone. The Levin Sword might outclass it for most purposes, but we want to continue using attack stance when possible, and the Dragonstone is significantly better for that if you don't need the range. I want to briefly interrupt that thought to say that the ninja Corrin is about to attack is kind of annoying. If we hit him too hard, he will use the vulnerability he's carrying on himself, slowing us down and also denying us one of its 3 uses. Jerk. Fortunately, 11 HP seems to be right above his healing threshold, so that won't happen. Anyway, we do want Corrin to promote to Nor Noble and reach level 5 in that class. The heart seal should be used after that point, going from level 5 to level 7, but that puts us right around the time of Chapter 19, which is when we'd really like Corrin to be in a flying class. Right now, he has no way to get one. There are no men in the army who can give him access to Sky Knight or Wyvern Rider by friendship. There are no women who can do that by marriage either, because the challenge rules implicitly forbid Corrin from marrying a first-generation woman. There is a solution to this, and we'll talk about that solution in detail during our very next mission. We've accounted for 4 heart seals. We used our first one on Elise, of course, and we've just discussed the next 3. Chapter 16 will give us a 5th heart seal. In my opinion, the best use for that one is very clear, but it's rather counterintuitive. I'm going to save that conversation for later. I think the developer's intention was for players to train Corrin all the way up to level 20 before promoting. That makes a certain amount of sense. In the short term, you can maximize your stats, and in the long term, Corrin's probably going to hit the level cap by the end of the game no matter when he promotes. But there's something to be said for using a Master Seal at level 19 instead. At this point, Corrin's only getting 9 XP per kill, so it takes about 11 kills to grow from level 19 to level 20. If you went ahead and promoted now, then Corrin would essentially stop gaining experience at all. But he would uncap his weapon ranks, and he would also unlock tomes. Rather than using 11 kills to grow from 19 to 20, he could instead work on his tome rank. 11 rounds of combat would get him more than halfway to D rank, which is rather important because we're going to acquire some very useful D rank and C rank tomes. The other benefit to a slightly earlier promotion is that Corrin's internal level will be reduced by 1. We want him to learn Draconic Hex, Heartseeker, and Malefic Aura all before Chapter 19. That's a pretty tall order. It requires him to reach what is effectively level 27, but the enemies before Chapter 19 mostly max out at level 22. So for that last level, going from 26 to 27, he would be earning 9 experience per kill again. That's not nothing, but it'll deny a bunch of experience to other characters who could get 25 or 30 points from those same kills. If Corrin were to promote 1 level early, then he'd be earning 15 experience per kill during that last level. That would make it significantly easier for him to get in and out of the Dark Mage tree on time. Unfortunately, we're constrained by other factors. We want Corrin to amass as many stats as possible so that he can meet important benchmarks with minimal amounts of tonics and stat boosters. In fact, before recording Chapter 14, I had to play ahead to find out what Corrin's stats would be like at the end of this chapter. His defense stat was looking a little dicey, and if he wasn't going to gain enough defense naturally, I would have had to save the Draco Shields for Corrin instead of giving it to Elise. That's why Corrin is going all the way to 20. If we play our cards right, he should get there before we fight the boss, so he'll at least earn a couple points of tome experience at the very end of the mission.
That was impressive.
But we'll have to make a special effort later on to feed him all the experience he needs before we start Chapter 19.
Reminds me of the old days.
There aren't very many enemies left, only 2 in this northern area. Corrin, Azura, and Gunter will have to wait a few turns for the replicas to reach the boss, and the best use of their time is to help Azura grind experience by shelter singing. Azura Prime should still poach as many kills as she can, leaving just enough for Corrin to reach level 20.
Be careful.
Let's go. I can help too.
Thank you.
Reminds me of the old days.
Corrin can squeeze out a little more experience by attacking these fighters with the Kodachi instead of the Levin sword. Because they steal his strength, he won't even kill them in 2 hits.
We will not fail. I live to serve. You're lucky I'm here.
Gunter's growth rates are horrible, but they're a bit better than they look on paper. If a character gets an empty level, this game will re-roll and try again up to 3 times. Gunter benefits from that mechanic a lot more than most people do.
It's not your time yet. Listen to your elders. You're lucky I'm here. Watch your back, child.
We want to be judicious with our vulneraries. They're here to be used, certainly, but they're also less cost-effective than healing staves, which means we don't want to pay for any new ones if we can avoid it. We're trying to save the vulneraries for situations where staff users are not available. Even here, by keeping Corrin close to Azura, we can reduce our need for healing items.
Ready for this?
Allow me to join you.
I'm here to help.
Corrin Prime has lured these 3 fighters southward. While he keeps them occupied, Azura Prime can go around to the north. Corrin's strength debuff gets reset from -5 to -6, so he won't kill this fighter on enemy phase. That ends up working to our advantage, giving Corrin a tiny bit more experience.
Allow me to join you. Watch your back, child. We will not fail. It's not your time yet. You're lucky I'm here. This one's not afraid to die. Watch your back, child.
All right.
Let's go.
You have my support.
We'd like Corrin to reach level 20 as precisely as possible. Because of the way the math worked out down south, Gunter can use Azura's dual strike instead of Corrin's, and then Corrin can take this kill.
Here we go. It's my turn.
We've got this.
We can do this. You're too slow.
I can always count on you.
Now we just want to put Corrin and Azura in position to do the exact same thing to the next fighter.
I'm with you. Ready for this?
Corrin Prime opens up some extra space for Azura Prime by killing the northernmost of the 2 fighters down here.
Listen to your elders.
Sorry.
Be careful.
This fighter gives us a tiny bit less XP because we've already fought him several times.
That went well.
Corrin has 93 experience points, and he'll get 9 from this last fighter, so he'll reach level 20 with 2 points to spare.
We will not fail.
Let's go. It's my turn.
I'm with you.
Here we go. This should help.
How'd you do that? This is my chance.
How troubling.
Before coming here, we bought a Master Seal and left it in the convoy. Now is the time to retrieve it. We can also ditch most of our weapons. If you've just promoted a unit at level 20, a good way to judge their stats is to ask, are these close to Camilla's base stats? For Corrin, the answer is yeah, more or less. He has the same strength and speed actually, but he also has significantly more magic. That's his best asset. Corrin Prime approaches the boss. He'd like to use his fire tome, but all else being equal, he'd rather not double the enemy. It's a little fortuitous that he only has 24 speed and not 25. But that isn't a big deal, really. It just allows us to farm a tiny bit more experience. Gunter Prime has 142 hit using a bronze sword, and the boss has 49 avoid, so his accuracy is pretty good. By being adjacent and not paired up, he also boosts Corrin Prime's hit rate to about the same level.
Stand firm. Watch out!
I'm with you.
Before we finish off the boss, Azura can sing twice.
Let's go.
Allow me to join you.
I believe in you.
Oh.
Azura is the one who can get the most experience from this kill, so we'd like to give it to her. First, Corrin can weaken the boss one more time.
Remain focused. Need a hand. Stand firm.
Let's go.
By using one of her weaker weapons, Azura can let someone else finish off the boss with a dual strike. We'd prefer for Corrin to get one more point of tome experience, but Gunter is significantly more accurate, and it's not really worth gambling right at the very end of this mission.
I live to serve. Sloppy.
For Azura, this is worth a cool 59 experience points. We also get the Speed Wing, of course. We'll hold on to that, and also the Spirit Dust, to see where they might be needed, but the Goddess icon will go to Corrin. A second Goddess icon will basically eliminate all the downsides of Corrin's Luck Bane, which otherwise become pretty substantial when we start facing enemies who have innate crit bonuses. Berserkers, Sorcerers, Swordmasters, Master Ninjas, Spearmasters, and Snipers.
Of course.
Huh?
Truly. No.
No.
Well,
Listen. I don't know.
Wouldn't it be wild if the route split with Revelation was right here?
We can do this. You have my support.
It's a happy accident that, because I rescheduled Paralog 19, we're encountering this notion of other realms where time flows differently in an organic way, before the game goes wild with it. I guess we already did hear about that way back in Chapter 3, but my castle barely counts as part of the story.
Listen.
Oh,
No.
huh?
That's,
Azura, does this have anything to do with the fact that our hair is the same color?
What? Well,
Listen to your elders.
huh?
Now,
Here, the rewrite is expanding on events that I believe are only mentioned in 2 support conversations, one between Leo and Elise, and the other between Camilla and Niles. I really do appreciate the attempt to elaborate on an intriguing part of the backstory. However, to me, it makes no sense that Gunter is the one telling us about this, and it makes no sense that he's doing it right now. He just got reunited with his foster son, and we thought he was dead. Why is he going on and on about someone else's childhood trauma?
It can't be.
Understood?
Thank you. Azura.
No need to worry.
Let's go.
Hey.
Huh?
Ah.
Well,
Listen.
oh, understood.
Well,
No.
I'm sorry.
Not a chance!
Don't be reckless! Truly.
It can't be.
Hey.
Well,
This, I think, is brilliant. In the original script, Corrin just accepts the idea that there's no way to save Garen. He remembers the throne of Hoshido, but only as a way to reveal the monster that Garen has become. So Corrin's plan is to wage a war of conquest all across Hoshido, take their capital, and seat Garen on their throne, just to convince his siblings that Garen is already dead and has been possessed by a slime monster. That's insane, and frankly, it's downright evil. The original script briefly acknowledges that, but basically Corrin just shrugs and says, "Yep, this is definitely the only way. I must do this stupid, evil thing." In this version of events, Corrin doesn't just want to expose Garen, he wants to save him. The throne of Hoshido is the only thing he can think of that might still work. Corrin's decision to keep prosecuting the war to bring Garen all the way to Castle Shirasagi is still a bad one,
I'm sorry.
but it's no longer born of pure idiocy. Instead, it's Corrin clinging to one last shred of hope. Or, if you're being less charitable, it's selfishness. That's a much more compelling motivation, and it was constructed from some rather subtle changes to the script. This scene is one of the very few in the Good Guy Garen mod that I had actually viewed before starting this LP, and it's the one that convinced me to go ahead with it.
I see.
My.
oh, I'm so glad.
Jakob, it's good to have you back. Get yourself situated, report to the armory, I guess, and just wait here. We'll check back with you later. Right now, some of us need to go meet a little creature from another hidden world.